Hello guys, and welcome back to DarkHorse FM, and in this video I'm going to walk you through my recreation of Mikel Arteta's overachieving tactic with Arsenal this season. I got inspired by another recreation I found on Reddit, and it was quite a dynamic sort of asymmetrical system, and then I felt like that tactic was actually going to outrun us through the middle, and I felt like that tactic was quite weak in the midfield, so I decided to go on and create my own version of Mikel Arteta's Arsenal tactic. Well, looking at the teams that we just finished playing, we're currently in the Europa League final awaiting Manchester United, and then we've had some heavy victories over here against Everton and Crystal Palace. There's Celtic in there. I actually expected to win Celtic. It wasn't all plain sailing really, but then we did have a 6-0 victory over Chelsea at some point, and then a 4-1 victory over Nottingham Forest. I did also expect to beat Nottingham Forest, but they were all those 1-0 odd defeats here and there, but quite a good tactic altogether. Now, the asymmetrical tactic that I found on Reddit looked something like this. There's a super keeper on attack, and then you have a central defender on stopper duty, an inverted wing back on attack duty, fullback on support, then the ball playing defender on cover duty. I felt like when I was looking at this tactic, I felt like it was a bit too open in the center of midfield. Not a lot of bodies in here, so it's easy for the central midfielder to actually get overrun. There weren't any internal instructions to the tactic, so I didn't go on to include those. But then I tried testing out this tactic, and it wasn't very effective. I didn't really get much results with it, so I decided to do my own research and then take time out to make a recreation of Mikel Arteta's tactic, or his philosophy. Yes, his tactic and his philosophy for Football Manager 2023. So let me share with you my research findings for Mikel Arteta's philosophy and tactic with Arsenal using a clean slate. So we're going to start afresh from FM23, and this is what I actually found out. Aaron Ramsdale is Arsenal's goalkeeper, and he tends to act like a super keeper, and then also tends to play around in the defense, have the ball at his feet. He's comfortable with the ball at his feet, and he's also good at starting counter-attacks, but he's not overly aggressive at always flinging in the ball for every counter-attack. So I opted to go for a super keeper on support that starts the counter-attacks, but he's level-headed somehow, doesn't always do everything rush. That's what I wanted. In central defense, Arsenal do play out from the back, and that's also important with the way they try and build up from the defense and try to get the ball in transition into the final third. And then I opted for 2 ball playing defenders on defend duty. At first I did start with 1 central defender on defend, but then I realized that that guy was more equipped to play like a ball playing defender on defend duty. This is Gabriel and William Saliba. So Gabriel plays on the left hand side, and then William Saliba plays on the right hand side. Both players actually played as a ball playing defender in this tactic, and you could actually use the ball playing defender and the central defender if you want. It kind of works the same way, but I opted for 2 ball playing defenders for this tactic. And then at left back was actually where it got interesting. I used to think that Zinchenko was a player that could actually overlap on the left hand side and get ahead of Martinelli. Of course, he has the ability to do that, but then I realized that from my research, Arsenal's tactic actually deploys Zinchenko as an inverted fullback. He can play on support duty. I did start on support, but then I settled in the attack duty role because there's going to be some space vacated by one of the players here. So Zinchenko is going to be the one to come in and fill in that gap and also go on to press the opposition as often as is necessary. And then at right back is Ben White. Normally I also started as a wing back on support duty, but then I realized that he was too adventurous and then he kept a lot of space behind. So I opted for a fullback on support duty, and then I realized that he was too deep. He wasn't getting ahead as often as I wanted him to get ahead. So I opted for the fullback on attack duty, and then asked him to somewhat play more safe sort of true passes, but it's not too adventurous in that sort of way. Now in the defensive midfield, I had Partey playing this role. At first it used to be an ankle role, but then I wanted this, let's say the ankle was a bit too stationary, and then I know that Partey is capable of playing, of let's say getting above the middle of the field, above this halfway line, and trying to take long shots from outside the box. So I opted to go for a defensive midfielder on defend duty instead. Shoot less often instruction is there selected for him, but I know that Partey probably has player traits within him that is going to allow him to bypass some of these player instructions that are set into those player roles. And then in the central midfielder on the left hand side, this is ideally going to be Granit Xhaka. What the tactic tends to deploy in this case is that Saka, did I say Saka? Granit Xhaka tends to drift into the half spaces of the left-hand side and also creates room for Zinchenko to actually get into the central midfield position here and try to orchestrate things from that region. So Granit Xhaka, by the way, is capable of also overlapping near Martinelli, because Martinelli is going to be playing in this left-hand side, the left-hand winger role. So I opted for the Mezzala to play where Granit Xhaka is often going to be, and then on support duty, very important, because I want him to somehow play a slightly more defensive Mezzala kind of role. A Carrilero would also work perfectly in this role, but then I realized it's not as attack-minded as the Mezzala is, so I opted for the Mezzala instead. And then the main role in this tactic that I have to really overemphasize is the roaming playmaker on support. This was a very tough choice for me because I could easily have used an advanced playmaker in this role, but then I realized that Martin Odegaard plays a lot more than just being the advanced playmaker in the team that goes around and plays through passes. He is everywhere. So if I'm using an advanced playmaker in this run that is tailored to the right hand side, he tends to sort of stick to the right hand side, but then I wanted him to do a lot more by sticking to one side of the field. So I opted to play him as a roaming playmaker on support duty and then have him drift around this space so he can sometimes find himself on the left hand side and find himself on the right hand side and be in the number 10 role, get into the box once in a while, and then come back to try and receive the ball from Partey in the defensive midfield role. So he's actually the engine room of the team. He is the key player in this tactic. So I already spoke briefly about the Martinelli role. Martinelli in this case is going to play slightly as an inside forward, but also as a striker. I think that's the reason why I picked the inside forward role over the inverted winger role. So what's going to happen in this case is that I want Martinelli and Gabriel Jesus, our eventual striker, to try and play off each other, and then this guy's going to get into the box once in a while, and then the striker in question is also going to drift wide once in a while. So there's going to be a lot of interconnection between these two players. That's why Martinelli is playing on the left hand side as an inside forward on attack. The last role that I haven't talked about here is Bukayo Saka's role, also a very important role in this tactic, and I also held myself back from playing him as an inverted winger on attack, which is what I had in mind at first, but then I realized as much as in real life he plays on as an inverted winger on attack. Ideally, you could actually do this if you want to, but then I opted for the support duty role because I want him to be slightly more creative than just trying to finish off chances, because Saka, as much as he's scoring a lot of goals this season, he's also creating a lot of chances. That's why I asked him to play as the inverted winger on support duty to try and cut inside, play those through balls, cut inside, take a shot at goal, also drift wide, and then have a good relationship with the fullback that is on attack duty here in Ben White. He is also going to overlap once in a while. Now for the team instructions, I'm going to actually start from the out of possession instructions, then go into in transition instructions, then go into in possession instructions. So out of possession instructions, and let me be honest with you, when I did the research, there were actually two ideas that came up. Arsenal have two ways of playing when they're out of possession. Sometimes they can actually play in a sort of mid to low block level and try to compress the field and stay in a kind of compact shape that doesn't allow the opposition get through them, and then they can win the ball back from the team and then go and hit you on the counter attack. Also, they have a way of playing with a high press, so I had to choose between which of these systems to actually go on to use. But then I realized that for most of Arsenal's season this year, most of their season, they've actually played with a high press and compressed the field, try to win the opposite or win the ball from the opposition high up the field. And then that means they also have a more often trigger press selected, and then they also try to prevent short goalkeeper distributions. That's because they want the opposition's goalkeeper to actually play a long ball over the top, because they have Partey, they have Gabriel, they have Saliba, they have, what's the other guy's name? Gabriel in defense. They also have Xhaka in there. So most of these players will somehow outmuscle the other teams in the air. So they kind of force that to happen a lot, and then that's where the preferential goalkeeper distribution comes in. For all the other instructions, occasionally, for the get stuck in instruction, this part was quite tricky. I did go on to include most of my players in the main tactic go on to have tackle harder inside, so it wasn't really necessary to include get stuck in instruction. Not everybody's going to be able to get stuck in. So like my strikers, Saka, Gabriel Jesus, and Martinelli don't have the tackle harder instructions, but everybody else from midfield to defense have been instructed to actually get aggressive and try to win the ball back early. So in transition now, that's the next phase. The counter press has been selected for this tactic, and then Arsenal are also encouraged to try and counter the opposition. But then when it comes to Ramsdale in goal, he has been asked to take short kicks. This is when he is in possession of the ball and is trying to distribute it when everything is calm. Occasionally, he's still going to try to hit the opposition on the counter attack. So this is where the manual in-game management comes in. If your short kicks aren't working, remember to always take it off and then distribute it quickly or take long kicks. So if you're playing against a team like Man City or Liverpool that are very good at pressing the opposition's defense, you might want to take off those short kicks as quickly as you can, because it could actually have a negative effect on your team. But by default for Ramsdale in this tactic, I went for take short kicks distributed to the centre backs and to the full backs. So for in possession tactic, then in possession team instructions, what I asked the team to do was to play with a slightly higher tempo. The passing directness was standard, but then I asked the goalkeeper, as I mentioned in transition phase, to play out of defense. An interesting part in the approach play here is the overlap on the right hand side. So Bukayo Saka is going to cut inside from the right hand side into the left, giving space for Ben White to actually get ahead. But on the left hand side, Zinchenko is going to be cutting infield, but I didn't force the underlap because I don't really want him to get all the way into the box. And what's the other guy's name? Granit Xhaka is playing as the Mezzala on the left hand side, yes, on support duty. So here on the other hand is not going to be getting, or as much as he's going to be getting into the box, he's also going to be drifting out wide into the half spaces. So forcing the underlap on the left hand side wasn't really necessary. I also asked my team to play with walking the ball into the box to try and be more patient when they're probing their position, and then run on defense was something I didn't really include as much as I wanted to, but I just left it like that. And then creative freedom, I asked my team to be a bit more expressive. And then for the general mentality, positive for most of the season for the big games. But then when you're playing against a smaller team, or you're struggling to try and create chances, you're struggling to try and impose yourself on your position, you can go and play with the positive mentality. I think for most of the season, I did go on to use balance, but for all the other parts of the season, there was a positive mentality. So I'm going to show you guys the tactic. That's basically what I came up with. It looks something like this. I noticed on getting to the main tactic that I talked very little about Gabriel Jesus in the number 9 role. So as a striker, I started with a complete forward on attack duty, but then I realized he wasn't playing the way I wanted him to. He wasn't getting as many goals, so I switched from a complete forward on attack that had a lot of freedom to roam actually in this whole area, and then opted for a pressing forward on attack duty to ask him to be a bit more aggressive, to try and trigger the opposition's defenders, try and force them to make mistakes. And then you notice that Zinchenko on the left back row here, he's playing as an inverted wing back on support duty, but ideally this role could be inverted wing back on attack and on support. So by default, I think you see on support, when I was creating it here, I did use the attack role. But depending on what you're opting to try and do, the inverted wing back on support duty is going to land in this sort of role here, and in attack is going to be slightly more venturous and get high up the pitch. So I use both when playing this role. So that's how I was able to recreate Mikel Arteta's version of Arsenal's tactic this season. And currently we went all the way to the final of the Carabao Cup. We got knocked out by Manchester City. I think, yes, a 3-2 defeat to Manchester City on the final day at Wembley. And then we are currently in the final of the Europa League. So we've been to 2 finals now. We got knocked out of the FA Cup in the semi-final by Everton. Wow, that's impressive. Everton, congrats. And then in the Premier League, we've lost 11 times, which is heavy. But looking at the teams that we've lost to, Bournemouth isn't there, and I'm not happy. We've lost to City, and then we've lost to Leicester. We've lost to United, West Ham, Spurs. That's also another one that's very endangering. But then we've won 20 of those games. So as much as we've lost games, we've actually won some of our other games. So Arsenal, in the end, we finished in 4th place, and then we didn't draw too many. So my team is always trying to win the game as much as they can. So if they rather lose it than trying to win it, they are not really settling for a draw. So looking at our performance in the data hub briefly, we can see that in our attacking, we actually did above average in the league, and then we had 2.05 goals per game. We're expected to score 1.77 excluding penalties, so 2.05 is actually a big step up. We're actually outperforming our XG with this tactic. And then in defending, we conceded 1.39, so that's heavy because it's more than 1 goal a game, but we're expected to concede 1.5, so which is not very good as well. But we did quite well overall, because as much as we were scoring, well, let's say we scored more than we conceded how many goals, and that helped us to win more games that we actually lost. So that's basically how this tactic went on, and that's the idea behind this Arsenal's 4-3 recreation tactic that I did for Football Manager 2023. I'm going to attach a link in the description so you can download the tactic and test it out for yourself. And by the way, before I forget, I tested out this tactic in South Africa with one of my created teams. It's actually a weak team in the South African lower leagues, and we did quite well. We're not predicted to go anywhere. I think we predicted to finish 9th or 8th, but we ended up getting promoted in our first season using this same tactic. So as much as I worked it out with Arsenal, I took it to a different setting, to different match conditions where the players have absolutely no idea how to play as a Metala, roaming playmaker, defensive midfielder, and okay, they can play as defensive midfielder. But most of the other roles, they are quite tricky for them. But then they actually did well with this tactic and went on to get promoted. So it's going to work out for you. I hope it does. And then I'm going to, like I mentioned, I'm going to attach a link in the description so you can get the tactic for yourself and see how it goes. I'll catch you much later with more Football Manager tactic videos like this. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already subscribed and you have more ideas for tactic preparations that we can go on to do on this channel. Remember to leave it in the comment section so we can check it out and do some research on that tactic. I'll catch you in the next video.